Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Suburban Teens on Acid, written and drawn by Dennis Worden. This came out in 1992, and it's very different than Dennis Worden's other stuff. You may know Dennis Worden from his character Stick Boy. There was a lot of issues of Stick Boy, I believe mid-80s to mid-90s. And, they're pretty, crude. It's all about the gags and the yucks, kind of crude yucks. And basically it's kind of humor that, a 15-year-old boy would think is very funny. But they're actually quite funny, because I think all of us have a 15-year-old boy still in them that likes stupid humor. But this is very different. This is basically a nostalgia trip. And Dennis Worden just wanted to give us tales of being a teenager in 1969 too, and doing lots of drugs with his friends. Start off with a really nice cover here by Dennis Worden. Man, quite a front piece here. It's very distressing. As you can see, though, this is from a panel within the comic, and Dennis Worden is utilizing totally different styles in this comic than I've ever seen him do. It's actually pretty great. For some reason, they reproduce it yet again, this drawing, as a header to this Dennis Worden editorial. He talks about how the popular media myth seems to be that in the late 60s, early 70s, everyone was a hippie. He says that's not true. Hippies were a hated minority. Police harassed them. Workplaces wouldn't hire them. Landlords wouldn't rent to them. And people driving by in cars would throw cans at you and shit. But he talks about, in the suburbs, him and his friends weren't really into hippie culture except for the drugs and the music. They just wanted to have fun. They weren't taking LSD for enlightenment. They were looking for kicks. And basically, Dennis concludes that when he looks back at his life, LSD brought him more pain than pleasure. And he kind of it sounds like he kind of regrets taking so much LSD. Because for years, he would, still have residual flashbacks and stuff. And it became very tiresome. So this first story, A Routine Night, 1970. This is drawn in the typical Dennis Worden style. This is pretty much how he usually draws. Nothing surprising here. This is just a little anecdote about hanging out with his friends at a playground in a park. One night, the police helicopter's buzzing overhead with its searchlight, bothering everyone. So they hide in the little playground things, or whatever these are called. And then they realize they're out of weed, so they go to their local dealer, Randy. Randy's married and has a little baby. And he tells them that they give the baby a little bit of Seconal every night to put him to sleep. And these are teenagers, and they're like, what the hell, you shouldn't give that to a baby. And as they leave, they're like, oh man, can you imagine that guy as your father? He'd probably be slipping that kid acid before he's in kindergarten. And think of all the drugs his mother was taking while she was pregnant. That kid will be totally fucked up, just like us. So this next story, Orange Sunshine at Disneyland, totally different style. In fact, I've never seen Dennis Worden draw like this. It's really kind of crude and, minimalistic, but it's kind of more expressive. I think it works for the story. Kind of interesting art. This is just an anecdote about him and his friends taking acid and going to Disneyland. Thinking they'll have a good time. And they actually do. They spend the whole day laughing so hard their cheeks are sore the next day. And Dennis says that he thought the LSD would make the park look more magical. But actually, all it did was reveal the phony facade that Disneyland is, even very clearly. So it just made it even funnier to them. And basically, they spent the whole day just laughing at all the other people there and causing trouble. And then they drive home. And Dennis ends it with, thanks, Walt. Because I guess it was a good day. This next one's called The Room, 1968 to 1970. And I knew older kids who had wicked cool crash pad rooms like this. So Dennis's best friend, Mike, his bedroom, he put black construction paper on all the walls. And then he splattered fluorescent paint on the construction paper all over and put up all these cool blacklight psychedelic posters. And of course, put up a black light and had all these little planets hanging from the ceiling to make it even more groovy. And this became the favorite hangout of all of their friends whenever they smoked pot. It was crazy in the 70s. It's just like parents had just given up. I think that adults realized they lost the culture war and they just threw up their hands and like, let the kids do what they want. We don't want to be old fuddy-duddies. And yeah, I knew older teenagers with just like kind of like half-naked posters, posters of half-naked women in their bedrooms. And they're in high school. And it's just like, oh my God, their parents don't seem to care. The parents, they didn't. And these weren't like shitty, neglectful parents. They were like good parents in every other aspect. But they just were like, let the kids do what they want to do. Some people didn't like The Room because they'd be tripping. And of course, it would freak you out being in this spacey void, But eventually his dad did get tired of it and made him tear down all the construction paper and the posters. A few disjointed memories, 1968 to 1970 or so. And this is just him talking about his dysfunctional family and some more weird trips he had. His mom would give him a carton of cigarettes or a gallon of cheap wine to pay him for washing the kitchen floor. That's how dysfunctional his mom was. We see the dinner table. It's a fucking horror show. The father's an alcoholic asshole ranting. The mother's a bitchy drunk. I like this arrow pointing to the sister who will marry just to leave home. Because that's how crappy it was growing up in this house. But having parents like this has a silver lining. Because they were such crappy parents who really didn't give a shit about their kids, they also didn't give a shit about what, antics they were up to. So Dennis could just have a stash box right in his dresser with all of his weed in it. And his parents didn't give a shit. So now he talks about some memorable trips too. Little anecdotes about all these crazy things he saw in acid. Mike and I once watched a car melt and run down the gutter. Once they were watching TV and they were watching cowboys rope dinosaurs, which probably wasn't really on the TV. It was probably in their heads. Once he combined LSD, PCPs, Reds, pot, and alcohol. As you can imagine, it was a very bad night. It was totally drawn differently than the rest of the comic. And a few more anecdotes about just being on acid. So here's the centerpiece of the book, Suburban Teens on Acid, 1969. This is 1986. I think this was in Weirdo. Maybe it was another anthology, but I'm pretty sure this was in Weirdo. And this story, I had read Dennis Worden stuff before this, and I remember being blown away by it. Like, this is unlike anything he's ever done. Just look at this art. It is so, sloppy and primitive, but really fucking expressive. It's kind of looks like Gary Panter or something like that. But it's even crazier than that. Look at every panel here. He's just scribbling in the background. Almost like he drew this while he was on meth or something. This looks like something someone on speed would draw with all this crazy scratch work. So this is a reminiscence about a particularly crazy night. Him and his friends were in another town where the cops were supposed to be really repressive. They weren't supposed to be in the house they were at. It was an abandoned house, and they were on some very potent LSD. So it sounds like just a recipe for disaster. And it sounds like that's what happened. I love this face right here, too. So as the story begins, Dennis is already not having that great a time. He's not having a bad trip or anything, but he's kind of annoyed with all these people at the party. They hear a horrendous noise outside and a loud pounding at the door. They all freak out. And it turns out it's just an irate boyfriend. But they all kind of leave the party, the house. They're kind of wigged out. When they get outside, they realize that Alan is missing, their friend. So they finally find Alan, and he was completely wigged out. And he just runs down the street, down the middle of the highway. His girlfriend says that earlier he had been dragging her around, saying he was going to kill her and quoting from the Bible, though he's never read it. So they catch up to Alan again, and look at the way he draws Alan. That is amazing. Just having this crazy bad trip. He picks up Dennis by the shirt collar and glares at him with rabid insanity. That's what's illustrated there. And Dennis says it almost seems like he has superhuman strength. So then he drops Dennis, starts running throughout the neighborhood, takes off all his clothes, is knocking trash cans in the street, rips off the top of Dennis's girlfriend. It's just a fucking nut job. So they realize it's hopeless and they can't subdue him, and the police are going to be there soon. So they just ditch him. They're like, fuck, what can we do? In the confusion, Dennis ends up leaving with Alan's girlfriend. I guess everyone ran different directions. So the two of them end up at the schoolyard, which is kind of nice because it's dark and quiet. And Dennis decides to hang out for an hour or two so he can come down because he took the same drugs Alan took. So he's a little scared. Finally, they go to a drugstore. He calls up his girlfriend's house. And the girlfriend says, "Where are you? Alan's totally okay. Snapped out of it." And Dennis says, "I know they are lying. I won't say where we are." He's totally feeling paranoid. Finally, they come clean. And they tell them that they were lying in order not to scare Dennis. So Bob, another friend, comes to pick them up. Takes him to Dennis's girlfriend's house. And Dennis is still tripping pretty hard, just staring at cracks in the table, watching them turn into multicolored patterns. Eventually, the girlfriend's mom comes home, so the boys have to hightail it. And they end up going to Bob's friend's house, who's got this cool crash pad. And they're kind of having a party. Well, basically everyone's just on drugs, sitting around a cheap stereo, listening to the White Album over and over. Finally, everyone else kind of passes out, but Dennis can't get to sleep. And this sounds like, the way he describes this and the way he draws this sounds like the worst trip ever. Like worse than anything my friends ever described to me. I was very lucky. I never had a bad trip ever. Sometimes it was a little scary, but it wasn't really scary. It was just actually fascinating. Like I should have been scared of the thoughts I was having, but it was actually just intriguing and interesting. But this sounds terrible. He says he can't get to sleep. His burnt out brain is screaming for sleep. Time crawls slowly on an ocean of broken glass. A clock chime punctuates each hour in hell. God, this is so good here. It's a great drawing. But just nuts. I mean, it's not great drawing, in the classic sense of the word. But man, it works. He says basically he's trapped in a world where there's no such thing as pleasure or hope or love. All is pain. Shit. That sounds so bad. So morning finally comes. The psychic beating is over. His brain feels pulverized. He can barely understand speech. And he's not ready to go home yet because he knows he's going to get the third degree from his parents. So he goes to Bob's house. And he takes a shower, feels a little better. This is him looking in the mirror. Another great drawing there. That's Alan's face. So Alan's girlfriend calls from the hospital. She says, "Alan's here. He's in the nut section. His arm, it just wasn't there." And so Dennis is wigging out. He's like picturing this severed arm. And he's like, what the fuck happened to Alan last night? Then Bob's mom takes both of them to the department store. She has to buy some material to make a shirt. And of course, everyone in the shopping center and the department store looks fucking weird and menacing to Dennis. Finally, he feels well enough to go home. I love this drawing too. He just looks like the wild man of Borneo. When he gets home, Alan's mother's car is parked out front. When he goes inside, she's in the kitchen with his parents. And she says, look, I just want to know where he got the stuff. My son is in the hospital and might never be sane again. I want to know who's responsible. And Dennis thinks she would die if she knew it was her daughter. So he doesn't squeal on her. He just goes to his room and finally goes to sleep. The next day he finds out that Alan was fine the whole time. Both of his arms are still attached. He basically cut his wrists in a window. And he never found out why he was given such bogus information. Oh man, this is super fun. So I guess in 1992, Dennis Worden found 2 pages of doodles he did back in 1970, probably under the influence, as you can tell by the art. And so he's probably drawn this stuff on LSD. I don't know if you guys ever drew on LSD. It's super fun. And I'm not even an artist. And it's fun even if you're not an artist. It's really a good time. These are really fun to look at. I like how he's even trying to do sequential narrative, like turn it into a comic. Even though he's tripping balls, he's like, oh, I still have to tell a story. But some of this art is like better than Dennis Worden's art, you know, from his career. It's almost like he got worse since he was a teenager. Look at this great stuff. This is so fun. The kind of stuff that you could only draw on acid, you know? Unless you're Henry at Valium. But then again, that guy might be on LSD all the time. I don't know. It's really great stuff. I love this little crazy contraption here. Oh, so much good stuff to look at in here. I love this little tableau there. Yeah, I spent like 5 minutes looking at this last night, and it was worth it. I just savored all of these crazy little drawings. I'm so glad he put that in. This next story is a character piece, The Strange Case of Ross Brown. So Ross Brown was a friend of Dennis Worden's, basically because he shared a love for underground comics and was also like a early adopter of the stoner lifestyle. He was almost a prodigy in that respect. Unfortunately, Ross was notorious for lying, stealing, and bad dope deals. So he's like one of those guys you hang out with, but you also don't trust and are like, this guy's an asshole, but he's my friend. He was very narcissistic, very trendy. Seemed kind of unpleasant, actually. But Dennis had some good times with him. But things changed when PCP made the scene. Basically, Ross adopted it as his drug of choice. Started to do it all the time, and it became very weird. Am I crazy, or does this totally look like Al Jaffe to you? It totally looks like Al Jaffe art. I doubt he was trying to do that. Once at a party, Ross overdosed 3 friends on PCP so badly, everyone thought they were dying. And they're like, Ross, you idiot. And he's just like, oh, guess I gave him a bit too much. Like, it doesn't even seem that, contrite or horrified that he almost killed these people. So Dennis lost touch with him for a few years. And the last he heard, he was found drowning in a shallow pond at a park. I'm sorry, drowned. He was found dead. It's kind of a nice little capper to the story. Dennis found this old sketch that he had done, that Ross had done, probably while he was on drugs, from 1970. This is, I guess, his little tribute to Ross Brown. And here we have a page about his best friend Mike, the one who had the cool room. And I guess Mike was this crazy kid who would do anything that anyone dared him to. He'd step on broken glass. He had a thing for breaking glass. He loved to just throw a jar up and hit it with a baseball bat until his whole yard and the neighbors' yards were covered in broken glass. One day he was trying to light his own house on fire, and Dennis had to chase after him with a garden hose and put out all the flames. But some 20-odd years later, Mike still enjoys a good fire. He has a nice large fire pit in his backyard. So it looks like Mike came out okay. He survived the 70s, and he's got a few brain cells to rub together because at least he owns a house. So I guess it's a happy ending. So that's it for Suburban Teens on Acid, guys. Pretty slim comic. It's just 24 pages. But I hope you enjoyed looking at it. This is really good stuff. I don't know if Dennis Worden ever did stuff like this again. But like I said, most of his stuff is just really goofy gag comics. And I was just looking at some last night, and they really are pretty funny, some of them, because they're so dumb. It's that kind of humor, you know? But I really like this foray into nostalgia and this lost time, this golden age, which I just missed, but I could see. So I got almost a taste of it, at least from a distance. And then Ronald Reagan came in office and ruined everything. So a tip of my bong water to you 70s teens. I envy you and admire you. It was truly probably one of the best times in all history to be a teenager. It was probably the 1970s in America, of course. If you lived in Liberia, it wasn't so good. But okay, I guess that's it for today's video. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.